Okay, good evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll open the meeting up to public comment.
Alan, I have a question on page 2.
State your name.
Mark Reynolds, 7 Oyster Time. Page 2, the approval of committee preschool and special education. It talks about recommendations. When you get to that point, will you give a summary of what those recommendations are?
Those are all confidential.
They're on student IEPs, and typically the recommendations are to continue service. Occasionally it may be a student's IEP has changed,
Okay.
so there may be a change in the number, the amount of service, the amount of time. Sometimes they're newly classified students,
Okay.
and it will give information about what that student's program is going to be. We don't typically summarize that information. As Alan indicated, that's confidential information, and although they are by student identification number, in some cases, because we are so small, depending on the kind of service a student may be receiving, it could make them more easily identifiable. So if you have any questions after the meeting, you can email me
Okay.
or Barbara. I'll let her know that you were asking. Barbara Jenner.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got another question, Mark?
I'm good.
Any other public comments? Thank you. We have two special presentations tonight. The first one will be the assessment committee report.
I don't think I need a microphone. So I'm Stephanie Santagata. If you don't know me, I teach English at the high school. And I have chaired the assessment committee. We have several individuals on the committee that are dedicated to seeing that things regarding high stakes testing and some of the offshoots of that are hopefully going to change for the better. And we've been meeting since October. And we have a group that represents teachers, parents, a board member, administrators. And so we have come up with a statement, an official statement, and I'm just going to read the statement. The board was given the statement already to peruse. But we're just going to read it out loud, and then we're going to give a few maybe a few actions that we hope might come out of this if the board would like to adopt this position based on the statement.
Excuse me, Stephanie, before you start, would you mind introducing your other committee members?
Sure.
So the board can see who
Most of us are here tonight.
worked on the document?
It is on the back of the document, but, so I'm Stephanie Santagata. We have Deb Kelly here, teacher. Ann Kiss is the parent representative. Eileen McElroy is the teacher. John McFarland, teacher. Ed Meisel, board member. Jim Moriarty, teacher. Chris Skrull is a teacher. Lee Weaver, teacher. And Dan Wetzel, behind the door there, is principal.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your hard work.
So, we truly appreciate the opportunity that you've provided us to seriously contemplate the impact of the New York State testing program on the Highlands Central School District students, parents, and staff members. We have taken this charge with utmost importance and have engaged in much effort and discussion to yield the best results for the district. To this end, we respectfully request your support and leadership in developing a district position statement concerning the current testing program. As a group, the assessment committee wholeheartedly agrees that the current nature of the New York State grades 3 through 8 testing program is not educationally sound and that it is negatively impacting our students, staff, and parents. Therefore, we request that you adopt a position that reflects the following. Realizing it is a state requirement to administer the New York State testing program. Currently, students at the high school level cannot refuse to take the tests and expect to receive a high school diploma. The positive educational impact of the grades 3 through 8 assessments is negligible. A large percentage of students do not take the assessments, and in fact, many families choose to opt out from those 3 through 8 assessments. Teachers are not able to see the assessment questions and answers to determine the strengths and weaknesses of their own students. And the results of the assessments are not available until students have moved to the next grade level. And oftentimes, those results are difficult to decipher, even when you can look at them. The administration and the content of the tests are not developmentally appropriate for students. Testing sessions are too long, testing procedures too confining for young children. Reading levels of the passages and questions are elevated beyond grade level. Students are forced into a one-size-fits-all approach to testing regardless of learning styles, special needs, or learning delays. By taking tests well beyond their academic levels and being asked to complete tasks outside their realm of capability, students are doomed to failure. The appropriateness and the usefulness of these assessments is below our professional expectations as educators. Field test questions are embedded within the assessments. Although these questions may not be appropriate and will be eliminated from test results, students are still expected to answer. These questions can have a negative impact on a student's approach to the questions that are graded and add to the frustration and fatigue during test taking. There have been instances of passages and test questions that have been disputed for accuracy and appropriateness. Assessment results are not an accurate measure of teacher effectiveness. Numerous professional groups have found that the value-added models, or known as VAM, used to assign teacher scores based on student scores to be statistically invalid. Teachers facilitate learning and skill development in a variety of areas that cannot be measured by a high-stakes test. Studies show that family income is a more significant correlating factor in testing outcomes than teacher practice. And there is no system in place to audit teacher and student score calculations. There have been some horror stories about where these tests are scored under certain conditions and who is actually scoring them, and we do not have a process to ameliorate that if anything is not correct. At the high school level, the Regents exams from recent years are also of great concern to students. So we are providing the following information to be mindful of as state ed transitions are still occurring. At the secondary level, as the shifts align with the Common Core, the same questions of accuracy that appear in the 3 through 8 exams are becoming more prevalent. Beyond the content of the questions, the normalizations of these exams to determine final scores are disparate among different exams as well as among different administrations of the same exam, weakening any hope to compare student ability across subject matter or among cohorts. Lowered normalizations can also lead to feelings of abject failure in certain courses, possibly leading to an alteration of a student's self-proclaimed college and career trajectory. While raising expectations makes sense, significant changes to cut scores that may be coming down the pike, test formats and diploma requirements that are newly implemented and/or projected may negatively impact graduation, especially for special education students. Because so much relies on the high school exam scores, we must call for the fairest scoring practices, as the exams in lower grades are being scored through private vendors, often under dubious circumstances, not by credentialed educators. We acknowledge that appropriate assessments are vital to inform instruction and improve learning experiences. However, it is the belief of the assessment committee that the negative impacts of the New York State testing program far outweigh the positive benefits. We realize the sensitive nature of any position that the Board of Education takes, knowing that you must uphold New York State laws and regulations. Your central role is to put in place programs that build success for our students, and we see how supporting our position may create a perceived contradiction among some groups. The assessment committee believes that the current testing program does not contribute to the success of our students, and we urge the board to deliver a message that underscores this notion. These are the key points, but there are others that we would be happy to discuss with you. We truly appreciate your time, and we'll be happy to meet with you to discuss these ideas in more detail. And we are going to, another member of the committee, Eileen, is going to discuss some recommended points of action, because it's great to say all these things, but you might not know what to do. And we have a packet of supplemental material for you to look at your leisure that we'll give you after Eileen speaks. I do want to say, though, that there have been, this statement is dated December 8th, and since December 8th, there have been a few rapid fire changes and recommendations from the Common Core Task Force that the governor put together. And we are very proud to say that almost every point we have just stated is seen in those recommendations from the task force. But Eileen is going to speak to the fact that we're not so sure that true change is going to be implemented. So, here's Eileen. Thank you.
Hi, all. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Eileen McElroy. I'm the middle school special ed teacher. As Stephanie said, we wrote this letter and we sat from October through December to compile all that information. And then we had this rapid fire change. The little supplemental packet that Ms. Kiss will be able to give out to you is really stuff that's come out in the past few weeks on various social media sites from different proponents of whether it's anti-testing or the task force, some stuff from the UFT and different organizations about what they feel is going on. I will also give you the speaking points I'm about to read with to you. Our recommended actions, knowing what we know and what we've investigated. This spring, many test refusals can be expected. We hope you'll support schools by asking for test refusals in advance and in writing, so that administration and faculty can plan ahead for smooth, highly functional environments for all students. Some neighboring districts have actively abandoned sit and stare policies for test students, while striking a balance to be fair to both groups. Allow buildings to design activities in the afternoons after 3/8 testing that could counter the stress and anxiety and build school morale. For example, in Lenape Elementary, they have a Zumba tournament. This spring, the test is still designed by Pearson. Any standardized test still creating data points being shared on a grand scale. For these reasons and other defined earlier, please support a parent's right to refuse a test, while of course keeping within your mandates from the state. Please contact our local regent, Josephine Flynn, to share your concerns. Currently, there are 2 positions open on the board for chancellor and vice chancellor. There are many people who are pro-education that should be sitting in those seats, and we hope that you will encourage her to elect people that would steer the ship in an ethical and pro-education measure. Please read the packet of supplemental information provided to keep you informed. Share the information if it resonates with you in your leadership roles in this district. See all members of our school community as allies, and let us continue to work together for meaningful outcomes and purposeful change. Post the assessment committee statement or any adoption of it as the Board of Ed sees fit on the district website. While the Common Core Task Force recommendations are being adopted by the governor, there is much reason to believe that these Band-Aids are mostly smoke and mirrors. The new section of the educational law, known as 3012D, and all of its points are still in fact law. Therefore, we ask the Board of Ed to act vigilantly and watch carefully as new developments arise. Our committee thanks the board and the administration for your continued support. And we have packets, and I'll give you a copy of the letter, but basically, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is anyone on the board have any questions? I do. Yes.
In the presentation presentation under moving forward.
That's coming up.
Okay. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's us.
Does anyone have any questions regarding the assessment committee? Right, yeah. I know back in the spring, many of the staff and administrators came forward at a meeting in regards to testing and asking the district to kind of act on the opportunity to allow the students to opt out. We asked to have that committee formed. I appreciate everyone that was involved in that committee. The hard work you did since, I believe, October through December. Give us the opportunity to read through the packet and the information in your report. And I believe at that point we can have further discussion and continue this on. Like we said back then, we're here to work with the district and the staff to try to work through this. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot has happened in the last 6 weeks, so let's stay tuned and see where it goes. I appreciate all the hard work the committee did. Thank you.
And on behalf of the administration, we'd like to thank you as well. And I would echo Eileen's words of caution. We are working with our legal counsel to get further guidance as it becomes available. What does this mean? And it's certainly far from clear yet as to what changes are actually going to happen. And later on in the meeting, I'll talk a little bit about that in my superintendent's comments, because I think that the message was delivered in such a way to make people feel like, oh, this problem's been solved, and we know that that's certainly not an accurate picture. So as we become better informed, certainly we can communicate what we're learning either to your HTA leadership or to the assessment committee chair. And certainly thank you again for all of your hard work. A lot of good information for us to review, and we will certainly give your request for some sort of district response or statement careful consideration, and I know this board will have a lot of further discussion about it, so thank you again.
Okay, our next special presentation, the administrative team will give a school report card report.
So the timing of things really works well, I think. We just had a presentation talking about assessment, and now we'll be doing a presentation on the results of the assessments that we saw last spring from the test that students sat for in May of last year. I mentioned in the memo that I attached the other data that I gave to you. This presentation, the first part of it, is the same presentation that we've done for the last 2 years. So I'm really not going to spend the time to go through all the definitions and the explanations that have been there. I kept it in so that when we post this on the website, people who might want to go on there to look at it can find what all of the different acronyms and numbers really mean. So I'm going to fast forward, other than just a good reminder of our school mission and vision statement, and try to remind people of that as much as possible. But I'm going to move ahead, take a quick stop where we look at the performance index, the PI, which is the number that the school needs to achieve in order to determine if we made AYP or not on the federal level. And I just wanted to point out that when we have a large number of refusals, it impacts our PI. So in a normal year, when every student would be taking a test, going by their formula, we end up with a PI that's 141. The next year, if half of the students sit for the test, it does decrease the PI by half, even though the scores are relatively the same because you're always going from the number of students who are continuously enrolled. So that impacts, even if, like I said, even if the scores are really the same, it's going to have an impact when we look at our AYP. Again, I'm moving quickly through these. Sorry for those of you that haven't been here the last 2 years for the other two presentations, but you will be able to find this on the website. Couple of highlights, as usual, our yearly attendance is right around 95%. That's really good compared to other places in the state. Our students graduating with a Regents diploma is 94% of our students. I'm gonna move this way, I think so. In comparison to last year, we went up a little bit, it was 89% last year. 39% of those students who graduated with an advanced diploma, which means that they had to pass a certain number of Regents exams beyond the baseline to be able to get that advanced designation. We also had an increase in the number of students who were attending four-year colleges after graduation. It went up quite significantly. I can't see the numbers as clearly from me from here, but we had a large increase from one year to the next. Our science scores were good, as usual, although you will notice, if you look at the percent who had valid test scores, we did see some refusals on the science exam, not the same kinds of numbers that we have for the ELA and math, but you started to see some influence on the science exam, even though I would say the science exam is maybe a fairer test. They have not changed that test. It's been the same test for quite some time. Teachers are aware of it. They know what to look at and what to look for. The next slide looks at our secondary, so our high school ELA and math results. I wanted you to have a little bit of history when you looked at this so you can see the scores of the last 3 years. For those of you sitting out in the audience, the numbers that are bolded are the results from last school year. So we'll be looking for the high school, we're looking at the cohort that started 9th grade in 2011. 100% of those students took the math as well as the ELA test, and we did make AYP for those tests. The students hit the accountability measures that they needed to. That PI, that center number there, is higher than the EAMO or the Safe Harbor target. One thing to keep in mind, those accountability numbers are going to be changing for high school students. They will need to hit a higher level of accountability on the new Common Core test in ELA as well as in algebra. It used to be that, wait, I need to get myself oriented. For the pre-Common Core exams, for accountability in English exam, students need to get a 75 to an 89 for accountability from a federal level, and in math, an 80 or above. With the Common Core regions, you see that the Common Core regions, you have to have a 79 or above, it switches. And in math, you need a 74 or above for that to count for us for accountability purposes. This is part of the conversation that's happening at the high school.
So when you say count, Sarah, that's the students who are meeting the state benchmark, and that counts towards our meeting AYP?
For meeting AYP, it is not what the student needs in order to graduate. So it's still a 65 or above in order to be able to graduate, but for the school to hit their accountability level, they need to hit those higher numbers. Our four-year graduation rates, for all students, we make accountability. It's higher than 80%, which is the standard in the state. We did not make it for economically disadvantaged students. The standard is 80%, we hit 79. That can be the difference in one student sometimes for us. If you look at our 5-year graduation rate though, when we keep those students beyond their 4 years, many of our students are being successful at that point. In fact, I think it's 90-some%. All right, moving on to the elementary and middle school, the 3 through 8 ELA. As many of you know, we had a very high refusal rate this past year, second highest in the county, actually. When you look at these numbers, and again, I gave you some of the historical data. This is just ELA. It's breaking it out in just several categories, all white, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged. Because we do not have 95 or above in this percent with valid scores, we do not make AYP, no matter how those students score on the test. So automatically, because there's no 95s there, we're not going to have AYP. The number that is here represents a 2-year average. So our numbers of participation were actually lower for 2014-15 than is actually listed here, because this is looking at the students who sat for the test both in 2014 as well as the students who sat in 2015. That's why we're getting 72%. So that makes it very difficult for us to really look and use those numbers very effectively, because it's a small representation of who our students are. And as I showed you earlier in the presentation, this PI is going to be lower because we have fewer students who sat and took the test, but the number of students who could have sat for the test is going to be essentially the same as the year before. So it's difficult to take a lot of information from the results of these tests.
Sarah, you said that there were 2 years of testing in that percentage?
Yes.
So does that mean that last year's testing will affect us with the next report card that we
Yeah.
get? So it's going to affect us both together?
Right, so next year, I think, given our numbers we had last year, even if we had a higher participation rate, there's a good chance that these numbers would be lower than they look right here.
Okay.
So we move on. So that was the ELA results. This is our math results. Same situation. Even lower participation rates even over the 2 years, which you've known. ELA is first. We usually have fewer students take the math. It's later in the year. Students have a little bit more anxiety about math, so they are maybe less likely to take it. I did want to just show you, this isn't in the PowerPoint that you have at your seat, just to give you a picture of our participation. This is 2012. We had roughly 844 students sit for tests. We just totaled all the students who sat. By 2015, by last year, in math, we had 357 students, in ELA 415. So significantly smaller number of students who took those tests over a 4-year period. Then again, that has an impact on our scoreboard. So, where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? We have data that does not represent all of our students, doesn't represent the learning that they have done over the past year, doesn't represent their growth. We use lots of pieces of data as we move throughout a day, a week, a year in a school. Some of it's very formalized, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of it's more informal. But we really think we need to start harnessing that in a little bit different way so that we can measure growth differently. In having this conversation, we really went back to why are we using the data? If what we have from the state isn't very useful, what's the purpose then? What do we really want to get from this data? And this is the statement that we came up with. And this is really going back to the work that we did with Simon Sinek and understanding why we go about what we do in the school. We use data to inform instruction with the goal of increasing student engagement and deepening student understanding. That's what we're working for. We want to be able to look at students, understand what they're learning, and help them learn better, learn more, learn deeper. In looking at this statement, as an administrative team, we had several pretty deep conversations about, okay, what does that look like then for us as a district? And we had to start out with, what are we using? What do we have in front of us as we're thinking about data? I produced a list. A lot of these were on the presentation that we did last year. Everything for reading, everything from DIBELS, LLI, Read 180, EAS, which I'm not remembering what the acronym is for right now, Pontus and Pinnell, Orton Gillingham, Wilson, Scholastic Reading Inventory, Easy CBM, right? I mean, we have lots and lots of ways that we're looking at reading. And the same is true for math, although not quite as many. M-Class, MOE Max, IXL, Castle Learning, Common Assessments, Key Master, and we're still looking for some more intensive math monitoring programs. On top of the more specific, those specific to math and reading, we're also looking at Regents exam scores, we're looking at attendance data, we're looking at referrals, DASA, state assessment, item analysis. We're really using lots and lots of different kinds of data. Our goal is to use that data, again, to foster an environment of pedagogical data literacy. We're going to talk about what that is. K-12 using a PLC model. So really having some deep conversations about student learning and student growth. We want to build more systems for data sharing from one department to another, from one grade level to another, from one building to another. So that as a student moves throughout the district, we have a common expectation of how we talk about data and how data is used. Part of that will be using more common benchmark assessments. Again, so that we can look at students from year to year with our standards, as well as Common Core, or whatever we're going to call the standards, and have an understanding of what that means for us. So what we're going to do next, I'm at the right place in the slide. Yes, what we're going to do next is really talk to you about how we see that working in Highland, and Deb Kelly's going to go from here.
I'm Deb Kelly. I'm the assessment and data coordinator for the district, and this is the fourth year of doing that work. A lot of it is related to the APPR data, but I also work with teachers on other data. And this is what I'm going to show you right now is based on research. It's not based, specifically on Highland, but you'll see evidence of it in Highland if you're a teacher who's working on some of the things that we're doing. So there's 5 phases of pedagogical data literacy. And data literacy, it's a nice big term here, but it really just means the ability to use the data and to transform it into instructional practices and to use it to the advantage of teaching our students and increasing learning. So the first stage is confusion and overload. This is not surprising. A lot of teachers and administrators are not necessarily trained on data analysis, and it gets overwhelming when you start seeing charts and numbers and graphs and all kinds of information, and it's difficult for the educators to necessarily embrace that immediately. And so to be supportive of the teachers and educators and move everybody through, we need to simplify the data, break it down a little bit, take time to present one thing at a time instead of letting people be overloaded. The second phase is that teachers and educators might feel inadequate or distrustful because they've just had this data shown to them. Their students didn't do as well as they wanted. They may feel they're being judged. And again, so we have to let the educators actually work through that feeling, feel that way and support them and show them the information so that they can start coming around to accepting it, which is the next phase. In phase 2, when they feel inadequate, they may challenge the test in a general way, saying, oh, that test, that's not the format we usually give, so of course our students didn't do well. But in phase 3, and these of course are not set number of days or weeks or months or anything, but it's just a process. Teachers challenge the test in a more specific way. They start looking at individual test items and critiquing them and criticizing them, but
looking more closely, and by looking more closely, start to notice things about the test that they might be able to see patterns and start to think that maybe there is some validity to it and that maybe something can be looked at, and one of the variables to be looked at is teaching strategies and what we're doing in our classrooms. So again, we have to support the teachers through that process by making sure they see the test and they understand the test and the standards that align. In phase 4, we start to get to the point where educators can examine the results more objectively and start looking for the causes of the student performance that they see. So they might notice patterns in what kinds of test questions were the students successful with, what kinds of questions were they not successful with. And if the students in my class were not as successful as the students in someone else's class on a particular topic, we should be talking about teaching strategies and what did you do that worked so well, and what can I learn from you? And so we really want to get to that point of working together and focusing on which students need more help and what do they need it on. That's really phase 4, that we're really starting to get to a turning point. And that will bring us to phase 5, which is really accepting the data as information, putting it into our normalized practice, working with each other to help the students and to share strategies on an ongoing basis. This entire thing could be thought of as a cycle because it can happen over and over again every time we get a new test or new pieces of data or a new group that works together. We could go through this phase, and the timing can be very different depending on what group you're working with and how often they have a chance to work with. That makes a big difference.
The only thing I would add too is that this is all educators. It's not specific to teachers. As administrators, we go through the exact same phases as we're looking through and working with data as well.
As I mentioned, I'm the assessment and data coordinator, and in that role, I do work with a lot of the assessments that are related to our student learning objectives and the local assessments, which are related to the APPR. But I also have a K-12 perspective since I work with teachers across the district and across all subject areas. And we've been working on coordinating some common benchmark assessments. This is an area we still need to work on because in order to use the data and to go through those 5 phases that I just mentioned, you have to have data on a regular basis. So we need to continue to work on developing the common benchmark assessments and also all of the data Sarah mentioned, finding ways to coordinate the use of that among teachers and administrators. And so one of the roles that I have is to work with the teachers and administrators to lead the conversations within the grade level or within the department to keep us moving forward on the discussion of data. And as Sarah mentioned, professional learning communities is one way to structure that, but there are many ways to structure it depending on what effort we make to use the common times that we have, which is difficult. It's not a lot of extra time in education. Anything else?
That's good. I think we'll move on to our building leaders. They're going to talk a little bit about what these things means or what this means for each of their buildings.
Hi everybody, I'm Joel Freer, the elementary principal, and what I'm going to speak about tonight is some of the data uses that we currently have employed at the elementary school. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is a representative list of things that are happening throughout the building, and then talk a little bit about some of the future roles of data and where we have to go. In all of our classrooms, we use data. The teachers are using it on a daily basis to measure the progress of their classroom, to measure the progress of their students, and to decide what instructional decisions they're going to make based on where students are at any given time in their classroom. Data is also used to help teachers and administrators make choices about learning groups and flexible learning centers within classrooms. That data helps to inform moving students from one group to another. In AIS, we have some students that may go every other day But then as the data comes in, we may see that those students need more support. We may move them to every day. We may move them back to every other day, things of that nature. So it's a fluid moving in and out of these instructional groups. Data also helps us in our progress monitoring. As students, especially at the early stages, they're developmentally challenged as they, not developmentally challenged, but our benchmarks and our assessments are written so that we can developmentally decide whether a child is moving at the right rate of progress, and if not, should that child be recommended for our instructional support team, where it's a group of educators that sit at the table and discuss just that child, what the strengths and weaknesses are. Teachers come with that data, and that data is all tracked through a system called RTIM Direct. We started very seriously this last year tracking that at the elementary level, and I know it's moving K-12. That progress monitoring also goes one step further. We need to do those through what is called the response to intervention model to determine whether or not a child needs to move on for further testing to see if they qualify for special education services. Again, that's just the tip of the iceberg of data that is used. I know Sarah had mentioned some of the other data sources that we use up there, so I don't want to reiterate. But some of the future uses that we see, we want to strengthen our data literacy of all of our staff members to help inform instructional support across the building in all areas, not just in classrooms, but special areas as well. Children that are having difficulties in those areas may need to, the data that is collected by the special area teachers may need to be looked at and alternate systems put in place. I want to mention, because Barbara Chapman is not here tonight, that this is something that special education teachers do on a regular basis through what is called an individual education plan. Data is collected all year long, and that's K-12, but I noticed that she wasn't here, so I wanted to mention that because we talked about that earlier. And we're always looking for new sources of data. So as Deb talked about the 5 stages, whenever we introduce a new source of data, we have to work through how that data is being evaluated by the staff members and how it's being used to inform instruction and to change things within the building. And in the end, that really helps to move our IST process and our RTI process at the building level along and help children get the services they need at the earliest time, because the sooner we reach them, the better they are going forth toward that K-12 continuum. I'm going to turn it over to Dan from the middle school.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Wetzel, principal of the middle school. As Joel said, not an exhaustive list of what we use data for, but kind of touching around the edges of that, main ideas of it. Certainly, we use data to ensure we're providing AIS, academic intervention support services, to the correct students. We certainly use it to monitor progress of students in AIS and special education, and monitor student progress overall. So we look at lots of different data. Sarah mentioned many of those. They were listed in one of the slides she had up that we go through that. We also use data to address environmental changes in the building that may affect student cooperation, participation in class. So we're looking at data for that as well. Where we want to go when we use the data, and I think you've heard me speak about this before, and it's actually quite a passion of mine, is to engage, so teachers engage in deep discussions among each other to inform their instructional practices. It's tough to have those discussions be really meaningful if we don't have data to talk about. And if we can get really good, consistent, solid data, then we can have those discussions and we can really improve instruction in the classroom. And certainly one of the things we're refining our uses and what the data we're looking for is to really understand the connection between AIS, special education, and general education, and to tailor that so we're more successful with those students. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Harris from the high school.
Peter Harris, high school principal. Here's how we're using some data at the high school level. Teachers, counselors, administrators are tracking attendance to encourage students to be punctual, present, and connected to their academics. We're tracking student grades on a consistent basis in order to communicate expectations for academics and for behavior, and to assist students in growth and hitting the targets. We monitor students as they meet graduation requirements, specifically credit accrual and Regents exam scores. We do this in order for teachers to create and implement interventions that lead to graduation for the students. What we want to use data for in the future. We'll work together to analyze student achievement trends and gaps in science, math, reading, and writing specifically. This will be done in order to reflect upon teaching, improve instructional delivery, and to plan and implement targeted interventions. Increasing pedagogical data literacy will help teachers to plan purposeful interventions and lessons. Teachers, administrators, and guidance counselors will look deeply at where students are meeting graduation requirements but are falling below college readiness. For those of you who have seen the color block charts that we've been using over time, a strength there is that we are helping to plan interventions for students so that they hit the requirement of graduation. However, Sarah was pointing to the one chart, I think you had a red circle around the new, what's called aspirational performance measure. So the shifting standard. That aspirational performance measure is what we're going to be based upon. And it is a point of demarcation where New York State is saying to us, this is the number score by which we believe students demonstrate college and career readiness. So it's above the 65, students can graduate, but the state has indicated to us through their research and their construction of their exam and the standards that if you go below that score, you're not ready for college level. So what can a student expect in that situation? Well, they can get their diploma, but when they go off and take their placement test in that specific content area, they may expect to place below a credit-bearing opportunity and be in need of remediation. So that's the next level for us at the high school.
And that's both 2- and 4-year institutions. It's not only 4-year.
Thank you.
So, what the principals just outlined are the things that we put up here. We were really looking at the effectiveness of the data to measure growth. What do we have and what are we measuring, and is it really measuring what we want it to? How do we make curricular decisions using this data? What, not only what we teach, but who teaches and how we teach it. We're going to be looking at the progress of a whole group as well as subgroups in some areas. You saw some of the subgroups that are listed in the school report card, but those are not the only subgroups that we have in a school. So we will really be looking at defining who those students really are. Again, and we're looking at our administrators to be modeling pedagogical data literacy, and I can't say strongly enough that we are learners in this process as well. There are some things that we're very adept at looking at and understanding, but there are other things that we need support as well in how to talk about and how to move the conversation forward. And that's really where the district level comes in. It becomes my responsibility, our responsibility to either provide or to arrange training for the administration as well as the staff in becoming these pedagogical data leaders and understanding what you're looking at and where it could go and what's useful information to look at versus what might be white noise that's distracting us from something else. And of course, on the district level, we need to monitor the building level data from, and see what's happening in each building and see how the continuity is between one building to the next. So this is our plan moving forward. It's not specific to the exact tests that we're going to use. I would say that we're in the middle of this process. We've been talking about and working with data for several years now. And I think in looking at the different stages or phases, we've worked through stages 1, 2, and 3 pretty well, and we're really at stage 4, I would say, is really looking more seriously at what data means and looking at it as information to hopefully get to stage 5 where we can really see that growth moving forward. But part of our process is going to be identifying what are the assessments we want to use. Because the state assessments, I don't foresee that the refusal rate is suddenly going to dramatically go away. So, you know, how do we want to make this ours, and how do we help our students?
What's going to be meaningful
Right.
and relevant?
So that's where we are with looking at that, thinking about it.
Even though the proficiency level is low, I am very, very pleased on how the school did. If you look at our scores, particularly from like the grade 5 from year to year, we've increased our proficiency level. And if you look at us compared to our other area school districts, particularly for grade 3, we're leading the pack.
I have to say, for grade 3 people who are looking and out there, we have the highest scores in the county in math specifically.
Yeah.
I had people from BOCES coming to me and asking, what did you do in math, and how can we do it too?
And I'm just, I say, even though it's a contentious issue, but I just said, we're doing it, you know. You know, maybe we have a ways to go, but I'm not an educator, but hats off to the faculty for doing this and making us #1 in the county.
So I think, you know, in spite of all of the controversy,
Yeah.
what you're seeing is that we have staff who are able to put aside all those distractions and really focus on instruction in the classroom.
It shows, yeah.
And, you know,
It shows the kids are getting it.
that's one piece of information on
Yeah.
one day, and we should be proud of how they did, but I think there are lots of other ways that our teachers
Yes.
are making sure our students are showing growth. And I will say that, again, this will be talked about probably more in depth by Sarah in her assistant superintendent's report. There was a math night recently at the elementary school, and I think there must have been about 60 or more parents who attended. It was a little more spread out because they were across more grade levels this time. But in every instance, when going by or stopping into a classroom, the teachers were enthusiastic and very knowledgeable, and I thought that the parents were engaged in seeing how their students are being instructed, and above and beyond that, what could they do at home to reinforce and support their learners, different activities that they could do that were fun, but that were still supporting what the classroom teachers were doing. And again, very, very positive energy. So despite all the outside distractions, our staff